The struggle for racial equality heats up seriously on a December evening in 1955. After a long day of work, Rosa Parks, a 43-year-old African-American seamstress and an active member of the state NAACP, boards a Montgomery, Alabama public bus and heads for the rear, in accordance with the law. The back is filled, so she takes a seat near the middle. Several stops later, the driver picks up several white passengers and calls out, "Niggers, move back." As Rosa Parks recalls,
on the buses, if white persons got on, the colored would move back if the white section was filled. It did not seem proper, particularly for a woman, to give her seat to a man. All the passengers paid 10 cents, just as he did.
Rosa Parks refuses to budge, and she is soon arrested for violating the city's transport laws. African-American leaders call for a citywide boycott of the buses. During the next months, a charismatic young minister, Martin Luther King, takes center stage. A leader who will galvanize an entire generation with his vision of nonviolent change and equality for all.
We still advocate nonviolence or passive resistance and still determined to use the weapon of love. We are still insisting emphatically that violence is self-defeating, that he who lives by the sword will perish by the sword.
It will take a decade of beatings and bombings and the murder of both black and white activists. But the civil rights movement demands that America live up to its ideals of freedom and justice for all, and nobody is going to back down.
The civil rights movement, which began in the mid-1950s and reached its peak in the mid-1960s, really reinvigorated the idea of freedom in the United States and pointed up the gap, you might say, between the humanitarian, broad, principled professions of the Cold War, in which the United States was the leader of the free world, and the reality that millions of black Americans were living in a state of, let us say, semi-freedom.
With the election of John F. Kennedy, many Americans feel a new sense of optimism. Initially reluctant, JFK officially welcomes Martin Luther King and 250,000 other Americans to the nation's capital on August 28, 1963. This is the March on Washington.
I still have a dream. Yes. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Two pieces of paper, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, signed by President Lyndon Johnson in the mid-60s, changed the lives of African Americans more than anything since the Civil War.
This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to go to work in our communities and our states, in our homes and in our hearts, to eliminate the last vestiges of injustice in our beloved country.
Well, the Civil Rights Movement had to do away with the idea of African Americans as outsiders in their own society, that they're finally to be included as members of the moral community, the political community of America. And they achieved that. It was a very successful movement. In the course of doing that, however, they achieved something else. They shifted the focus back to the Bill of Rights. They emphasized the fact that freedom is not a static thing. which you achieve once and for all, but something which you struggle for and something which you have to be always vigilant about.
The Civil Rights Movement not only transformed the status of black Americans, but inspired numerous other groups to use the same tactics and language to claim their own rights and freedoms. Other non-white minorities in this country, Asian Americans, Chicano Americans, American Indians, formed their own freedom movements inspired by the black struggle. The modern women's movement came right out of the Civil Rights Movement, and many of the early women who were involved in feminism had already worked in the struggle for black civil rights. So it really transformed the meaning of freedom and gave it a new substantive meaning in American society, which went far beyond the confines of black America. It really affected everybody.